Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. I'm your host, Dave McHugh, broadcasting out of the Hoopsville studios in the greater Baltimore area. Thanks in part to D3Hoops.com and others. Hope you're enjoying the show here on a Sunday evening. A reminder, the shows are on Thursdays and Sunday nights, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, each of those nights. A quick plug for next week. Right now we have Coach Mike DeWitt of Ohio Wesleyan lined up. We'll talk about his battling Bishops and their season, but also he is the National Committee Chair for the Men's Basketball Committee. We'll be talking to him. If you want to catch up in between now and then, you can go back into the archives of Hoopsville and catch an on-demand broadcast we had with him back in the off-season, and obviously we will follow up on that, though some of those topics we'll not go into depth with since we did talk to him in the off-season. In the meantime, if you have any questions for us or if you have questions for Coach Mike DeWitt coming up on Thursday, email us at Hoopsville at D3Hoops.com. That's Hoopsville at D3Hoops.com. We do use AOL-IM while we're on the air, and that's Hoopsville 2000. Of course, we're also Twitter friends. It is at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. Or D3, or go to twitter.com/D3Hoopsville. You can also go to facebook.com/Hoopsville. Be a friend of the show. Our Twitter account is linked into Facebook, so you won't miss anything either place. Obviously, you can get more information, guest information, archive information, show information, you name it. We've got it all there. So we hope you don't miss out on an opportunity to do any of that between now and whenever. And again, Mike DeWitt coming up on Thursday. Speaking of National Committee chairs, though, we now go to the Hoopsville hotline, and joining me now is Robin Hamilton, chair of the NCAA Women's Basketball Committee chair. Once again, Robin, welcome back to Hoopsville.
Thanks so much, Dave. I'm real pleasure to be back with you guys.
I certainly appreciate it. By the way, if anyone's curious, we are pre-recording this interview. Robin is choosing to enjoy her festive sports weekend with an NBA game, so we agreed we would pre-record the interview. But considering the festive football weekend or sports weekend, your football hasn't gone so well. As a Ravens fan, I do want to thank your Broncos for some stellar defense.
I'm having a tough weekend, Dave, and now you're going to add to it by rubbing a little salt in my wounds.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm a born and bred Denver Bronco fan. Grew up watching the Broncos play in the South Stands of the Mile High Stadium, so that was a tough day for me yesterday.
And of course, you're from the Seattle area, and a tough loss for Seattle, though a nice comeback. So that's at least something to hang your hat on.
Wow, you're really pushing it now,
I'm
Dave.
sorry.
I'm
just covering the bases.
In the NFL.
I'm a media
perfect.
guy. I got to cover all the bases, you know.
I love it. No, we're quite proud of our Seahawks and our rookie quarterback. So we will live for next year. But yeah, it's been a great weekend of sporting weekend. You have NC State upsetting Duke. We got all kinds of things going on this weekend. Yeah,
a terrific weekend to be a sports fan, to say the least. Hey, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. I know we get you a couple times a year, and getting you here before the full swing of regional rankings and the like, just to kind of go over things, is always appreciative. I hope the fans appreciate it as well. Obviously, I believe this is your third season as NCAA committee chair on the women's side, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I must have done something wrong in my previous life.
I was going to say.
Get to do this a third year. No, it's a real pleasure and an absolute honor for me to serve in this capacity for the NCAA and the coaches and student athletes that represent us so well at Division III women's basketball. So it's my pleasure. Of
course, we should mention also Associate Athletic Director and head of the women's side of athletics at Puget Sound, the Loggers. I was going to wear the T-shirt you guys gave me. However, we had some cleaning up recently and rearranging. I don't know where I put it.
Well, you know, you got to hold on to those things. Loggers are one of those unique mascots in the country.
Absolutely.
So
well, I have it. I know that much. I just don't. I meant to wear it. Didn't happen, but I promise if I find it between now and the show or sometime during the show, I will put it on during the live show.
I love it. Thanks, Dave.
I appreciate you guys sending us one. And if anybody's curious how to send us one, email us. We'll give you some information. Well, let's get to the nitty-gritty, as it were. First and foremost, regional rankings. You know, a lot of people, old school like myself, kind of remember 5 or 6 of these, which means we were kind of dealing with them already. A lot of cutbacks over the years. Now we're down to just 3. Which seems a little strange, not worth going into, certainly, but they are coming up soon. First and foremost, give everybody an idea of when we can see these regional rankings and when the committee is getting ready to handle all this.
Yeah, it's happening fast, Dave. Once we hit the holiday season, it really turns into our prime time here. We're going to start off with a mandatory Regional Advisory Committee member webinar on January 22nd, which is our first opportunity to speak to everyone in a consistent manner about how we want to approach these regional rankings. And this is an educational piece that the NCAA and Division III came up with last year was our first one. And I just think it's a terrific idea so that everybody's hearing the same messaging at the same time about how we want to approach this. So that'll be our jumping off point. And again, that's January 22nd. We'll do a mock ranking at both the regional and national level. At the end of the month, the 29th will be the regional ones, and the 30th will be the national mock rankings to just kind of work out some of the bugs and work through the computer system, make sure our score reporting forms are all working properly, and just give us sort of that dress rehearsal. And then we'll kick things off with our first national rankings coming out on February 6th, and then every Wednesday until Selection Sunday, which is February 24th this year. And we'll be ready to put that field together for another run for a national champion.
And we should mention the ones on February 24th. In years past, there's been confusion as to whether they are become public. I know in some sports, I think men's basketball a couple seasons ago did make them public. Last year, we were expecting them to be public. They were private. I assume we will not see them again this year either.
But we will not publish the final regional rankings or national rankings that day when we actually put the field together.
Do you know, and I've asked Mike DeWitt this question as well, we'll follow up with him on Thursday as well, is there any push to make them public? I know there's been a bit of an outcry of this whole, we want to be more transparent, we want to have everybody understand how all this works, but the idea of then throwing these final regional rankings kind of under the rug kind of comes across a little strange. I think on the men's side there's been a push to try and get these be released again. Has there been any push on the women's side? Has there been any interest on the women's side?
Well, I think everybody, is a proponent of transparency, but I think what trumps that is getting it right. And we certainly don't want to put these wonderful volunteer coaches and administrators that are on our regional ranking committees throughout the country on the hot seat on the final day. I think that's something that, we as a national committee come to expect, and we understand that that's what our role is. And, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. And I think, it's sort of a protection thing, too, to make sure that, regional people don't get thrown under the bus, and at the same point that we get a checks and balances are the most important part of this, because you want to get it right on the day.
Well, quick follow-up on that. Obviously, making them public before you come out with a bracket doesn't add up in my head either. Is there a thought of having them public after the bracket's been released? Or do you still feel it needs to be protected, even though the bracket's out, we all kind of know who made it and who didn't?
Yeah, I see both sides of it for sure, Dave. I think that we want to trust that it's going to be. But if there's been an error made, maybe just purely from a lack of information or misinterpretation of the numbers, that we'd like an opportunity to correct that. And so again, sure. I think trying to protect those members of that committee of just not having to deal with it publicly and getting it right on the day, like I said, for the national selection. So,
well, and
I absolutely see both sides of it.
Yeah, and I was going to say I can go in circles.
If I'm a coach with a horse in that race, I absolutely will have some pretty adamant feelings about wanting to see it if I don't get selected. So I think
the biggest argument that some people will say, and it's hypothetical in this scenario, but it's possible. And this kind of leapfrogs me to my next question, but we don't know what changes take place between the regional rankings on that Wednesday prior and the ones that make the brackets. So some people may not understand how one team might be able to jump ahead of another team, hypothetically, because we don't see them making the tournament, the other team doesn't. That's where we get the sense of a jump ahead. But that being said, in years past, last year especially, National Committee could not make changes to the regional rankings in the publicly released regional rankings leading up, but could make changes at the very end, which obviously led to a lot of questions. Did the regional committee make the change? Did the National Committee make a change? Maybe this year there's a change for that. I know you can make the change at the very end. Are there any sense that you can make changes in the publicly released rankings, obviously before they're publicly released, but after they've been voted on?
Yeah, and in preparation for this call today, Dave, I tried to find the actual written statement that says that the National Committee this year can change regional rankings on a weekly basis if they see the need and the cause.
Okay.
I can't find that in writing. I wish I could, just so I could read it to you. But I'm under the impression, as of this date, that is something we can do as a National Committee this year. And I'd really like an opportunity to get back to you with confirmation, and I'll just email you the documentation on that to confirm that I am correct. I hate to be misleading at all,
Sure.
and it's purely because I can't confirm it right now, and that makes me feel like I don't want to go forward with being an absolute statement.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And if you can make changes, though, that almost kind of helps the cause of not having a release, because we kind of will sense maybe and I'm assuming here, I assume this would be your goal, more of a consensus of how these regional rankings should be compiled leading up to the final ranking. So thus, by theory, those final regional rankings will be at least a little bit more understood, and there may not be some wholesale changes or major changes that would surprise anybody necessarily.
And I think that's probably true. And again, it goes back to the age-old problem that you have regional rankings, and then you need to take those regional rankings and criteria and make a national selection. Mm-hmm. And that's really the rub. We all know is that it's hard to take those regional criteria and then somehow make it universal for a national selection when you're then having to compare region to region instead of inside a region. So that's where it becomes a little more difficult for sure.
Let's get to those regional committees. For starters, let's start with your national committee. One change on the entire national committee, but if you don't mind at least running through who that change is, who the person who took
Sure.
over is for whatever region it is, and then at the same time, just can you give us a brief sense of who the 8 members are, including yourself?
You bet. Our change was in the Central, where Carrie Carrillo took over. She's from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and she replaces Tim Bernero, who was on our committee from the Central region from Carthage. So that was the one change that we have. But returning, we have Aaron Nestor, who out of the South with Oglethorpe, Keith Mondillo, he's at Gwynedd Mercy, Lisa Unish, who made a change but is at Wheaton, Mass, as an administrator, Tara Ruck is at Potsdam, and Matt Donahue from a very good Catholic program right now. I know they got beat this weekend, but Matt's a great member of that team. And then I didn't mention Dixie Jeffers from Capital is also a member of our committee, along with Kelly Shaw from the NCAA and Ethan Walker. So a pretty veteran group.
Yeah.
I think they take this business very seriously and put in lots of time. So we're excited to have Carrie on the committee this year, and to just sort of give some additional new eyes on the old procedure that we've done for the last couple of years.
Not to look in the future too far, but on the men's side, they had a lot of overhaul, as it were. Only 3 committee members, I think, stuck for varying reasons. Some tenures were over, others had to leave. With this few changes, that kind of makes me think next year could be a large turnover.
Yeah, I think we do have some people going off the committee. I know that obviously I represent the West, and that will be a change. And so we'll also have a new national committee member or national chair coming out of that group. And I believe that Keith and Matt are also off the committee next year. So those are 2 veteran guys that bring a great deal of information and hard work to our committee.
Now, this gets us to the regional committees. Obviously, every member who's on the national committee is in charge of their regional committee. I know there was a lot of talk, in general, there's always talk about having the regional committees kind of on the same page. I know on the men's side, and we'll talk about this more with Mike DeWitt on Thursday, there was a little bit more confusion as to what the priorities were for each regional committee. But even on the women's side, where you don't have to weigh the home and away games necessarily as there's still, each committee has a different idea of how to read the numbers, the strength of schedules, the win-loss percentages, the opponent's winning percentage, the opponent, all the details and all the stats and all the data that goes into this. How has the work been on trying, and is there an effort to really put everybody on the same page?
Yeah, and that's why I go back to that the sort of webinar that we're doing on January 22nd, so that we all hear the message the same. And again, human nature is to interpret things differently. Every word that I use, the connotation may be different for you. And so that's just our goal. Ultimately, is to be consistent from region to region to see if we can't get people to read things and interpret the numbers the same way. And so that's always our focus. It's been my focus as a committee chair for the last couple of years to just, really pound home, are we doing this the same? This is what you did. And even not just from region to region, but week to week, making sure that, okay, last week we had this team in front of this team based on, this criteria. We've got to stick with that. That's how we're going to interpret that. If we do it week 1, we've got to be doing it week 4 on Selection Sunday. So that is the charge. That is the what keeps me up at night and what keeps me like nails on a chalkboard to the committee members. They probably are so sick of me on Wednesday mornings just beating that home. But that's important, and it's something we're going to continue to try to do this year.
And I assume there's a bit of a push in the sense you mentioned it there. What works or what is your criteria in week 1 can't be changing around by week 4 because all of a sudden you don't like some. And that being said, opinions change and other ideas change, and certainly if people go, well, maybe what I was trying to say was a strength in week 1 really isn't a strength in week 4. How are you instructing everybody to kind of deal with that in a sense?
Yeah, we're asking each of the committee members to stand tall with their committees and really keep. And part of that, Dave, honestly, is there's so much going on in our lives that keeping really good notes. We're putting rationale together before we vote. For instance, in the West, we ask each of the RAC committee members to send me, because I'm a non-voting member on the West RAC, their rationale for why they rank people in a certain way. I retain all of those, and they write it out in their own words about why they put Team A above Team B and B above C, so that we can go back to it and say, well, now last week you put B above C because of this. Now we can't, how do you justify changing it, your thoughts and ideas from last week into this week?
Is that something?
And we've done that at the national level now.
Okay. I was going to say, is that something the other regional regional committees are doing?
Yes, and then as a national committee, we're sending those forward to everyone when we were obviously before they started to vote autonomously, and their own autonomy in terms of their votes on the RAC. We used to have to send that in advance to try to, justify and make sure that we're consistent in terms of that application. That
so nicely is a segue for me that gets me to the next element. Last year, something I did not appreciate during the season and really didn't get a grasp for till near the end of the tournament or in the off season was this autonomy part. Normally, for anybody who's new to this or old to this, the regional committees meet, I think, on Tuesdays, if I'm not mistaken, kind of go through it, have a conference call, et cetera, come up with a vote. That then goes to the national committee. The committee makes their decision, and on Wednesday afternoon, we get the regional rankings. The change to that this year, or last year, was that these regional committees have this conference call on Tuesday, but then they go vote on their own individual own to decide who gets, basically like a top 25 poll. It's almost, they come up with their regional ranking, and then the committee chair has to take that on Wednesday to the national committee. Is that still what's in play? Is that still the focus?
Yeah, what happens is, we don't have to come to consensus on that conference call with our RAC committees. And they do vote independently directly to the national office. And we as committee members don't see how individuals voted. So then it's published back to us on Tuesday evening, and then we look at it and go through the conversations that took place among our committee and how they landed that way. And I am really proud to say, and that is by being in this business a long time, is that the integrity of the people that we're talking about is spot on. And I don't even think we have a case last year where those committees or those individuals didn't vote as the conversations took place in the RAC. So I'm saying that, the conversation is, and everybody knew basically what, 1, 2, 3, honestly, Dave, in a region you can probably figure out.
Yeah.
right? But 4, 5, 6 down, that's where it gets muddy because this team beat this team and then they turn around and the other team beat that. That gets a little bit muddy. But we did not have people voting just crazy. Like they didn't vote a number 6 and number 1. They didn't vote a number, they didn't do those types of things. So it really did work. And that's, again, based on the fact that you trust the people that you bring onto these committees. They have a great deal of integrity, and they also have a great deal of passion for the business. Many of them are coaches, as you know, and they want to see it right, too, because down the road they want to be treated fairly as well. So I'm really proud of that fact. And so from that standpoint, I think it's a great process in terms of people being able to just really vote their conscience, and then it still comes to a group committee decision because of the numbers, the way the computer works it out for each of their votes.
But I do have to ask, I'm sure there's still surprises every once in a while. How hard is it as a committee member, in the sense that you're representing the West Committee, when you go to the National Committee and the National Committee members are asking you, well, why did you have 4, 5, and 6 in that order, when maybe you're surprised by that order yourself? I know you're getting extra information from your committee members, so that probably is going to ruin this hypothetical. But how much is it maybe put you in a bit of a lurch when you're saying, well, apparently this is the reason for this. I really need to figure out why they're voting as such. Does that hamstring you in any way? Does that cause issues in any way, if there is a little surprise like that?
I think it would. I mean, I was really fortunate we didn't have any of those surprises. And the West may be, West is a little bit unique in itself, but we didn't have those types of surprises. And I'm really pleased to say I wasn't surprised when we got the rankings. They were spot on from what we had come away with during our meeting. And again, even though we don't get to complete consensus, there is a sense that we know how people are going to vote when we get off the phone. So, yeah, I mean, there is some potential to that. But, again, that goes to, being a good facilitator and really asking hard questions during the course of that call. And then, like I said, keeping good notes, because I have pages and pages. I can get moved to a smaller office when I'm done as committee chair because I can get rid of some of the papers that are in there. So I think that's the job.
And the other thing, too, is you do seem to hold your voters in your region. It sounds like on the women's side, all the regions hold their voters accountable, in the sense that while you don't see them vote and you get the ballot totaled back, you do ask them for why they voted a certain way, so that you are holding them accountable in some ways. There can't be true anonymity to how they're voting.
No. I mean, and the other thing is, if you're not on that call, you're blocked out of voting.
Interesting.
So if you miss your regional call, first thing we do is send that information on to the NCAA, and then they block you as a regional committee member. Won't be able to vote unless you were part of that conversation that day.
Interesting.
Which I think is fair.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to be an educated and invested participant in order to cast that vote.
I'm sure there's people listening in who may be new and going, okay, hold on, but what's all the information that they go through? And I know it's a lengthy list, and we don't have to go in every detail. But generally speaking, when you're looking at a team and how you're going to regionally rank them, can you give us the basic points, the primary criteria? Let's say we don't need to get into the secondary criteria because that opens up another door. But the primary criteria, for the most part, on how you're regionally ranking these opponents.
Yeah, obviously win-loss percentage is a pretty critical one.
In region win-loss, yeah.
Yeah, in-region win-loss, in-region strength of schedule, which, again, if you had a whole other show, we could go into what all's involved in the strength of schedule, and if I had a mathematician with me, that would be really helpful. And then also, wins against ranked teams.
Regionally ranked teams.
Regionally ranked
Just in case
teams,
some people think ranked means top 25. It does not.
Regionally ranked teams, and then, head-to-head competition against teams also plays in as part of that.
And of course, next year, this year, the model of regional opponents, and to quickly cover that for everybody, anybody in your technical region, anybody within 200 miles, which on the West region I know is not necessarily a factor. And, of course, anybody who is in the geographical NCAA administrative region, all this information can be found on d3hoops.com. Next year it changes. Next year we go to the 70% rule, which means if you play 70% of your games in those regional rules, all of your games count. I know you're walking away from the committee, so this isn't necessarily a big concern for you, but looking at it down the road, will that help or maybe cause this to be a little bit more challenging?
I'm not sure. I think it'll be interesting. I would guess that it might make selecting the national selection part a little bit easier.
Sure.
Just because there'll be a little bit more information and a few more numbers.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation, obviously, for the West, because even, to play anyone in the West region outside of our conference, for instance, in the Northwest Conference, or for the SCIAC people in Southern California, you have to get on a plane.
Yeah.
So getting that 70%, that in itself might be a challenge for some sports. So I'm hoping that the reason that they're dropping basically secondary criteria is to see if we can't get more comprehensive numbers to be useful in the national selection process. So
Sure.
From that standpoint, I'm all in favor of anything that was going to help us move that direction.
I just can't wait for regional rankings based on national games. This will be fun to watch.
It will indeed.
Talking to Robin Hamilton, chair of the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship Committee. Regional rankings, as she mentioned earlier, will first come out February 6th. We'll get 3 of them before the final one is not released, but that comes out with the bracket, or it's timing with the bracket, so we'll know who's in anyway. It doesn't matter with a mock regional ranking, which we won't see either on January 29th, to make sure everybody is in tip-top form. We're finishing things up here with her, and we appreciate the time that she's devoting to us. Robin, the other thing, too, is obviously the committee, the other charge that you have is putting the bracket together, and every year it's kind of interesting how it gets all put together. The women have always kind of been not held to a higher standard, but held at a high standard because they've done such a great job of evening things off, even to the fact that Hope and Calvin some years have been on opposite sides of a bracket, considering they're 20 or some odd miles apart. That's pretty impressive. Though there have been years, and I think last year comes to mind, where things maybe weren't as easily split up as it possibly could be. What's your ultimate goal when you move forward with this? What's your goal this year as you put together your tournament as we head towards Holland for the Final Four?
Obviously, we want to get the top 64 teams. We want to get the right 64 teams in there. And there's so many different criteria that go into who hosts and who doesn't, and where people go, and how that bracket is set up. And a lot of it is based on NCAA protocol in terms of geographical proximity and
Right.
that type of thing. That is really, those are just the rules that you have to play under. I mean, just like playing any other game, there's certain rules that you got to get the shot up in time, kind of thing. So that is really the toughest part, but I really like the way we try to be as creative as possible. And there's things that people don't know that certain teams just didn't put into host.
Right.
Or
Sure.
it was the year that the men
Got
the
the
host.
rights.
And so then there's so many different, and it's case-by-case scenario. You think you have your entire bracket set, and then you find out the team that had thought that they were going to host has decided at the last minute that they don't want to put in their bid. And so we're sitting there on Sunday night and going, oh, okay, they just pulled their bid, so now we're going to try to move them somewhere else. And that because of the number of miles they are between, you have to put a different team into that
Sure.
side of the bracket. And that's frustrating. If you had an unlimited budget and we could fly people all around the world or all around the country and move them from place to place, that would be a very different looking bracket, as you know.
Sure.
It comes to mind, first of all, the frustration I get locally and putting George Fox and Lewis and Clark playing each other in the second round because of where they are. And those, as we saw George Fox go all the way to the national tournament championship game, those are two really good teams, and they have to match up in the second round. And those scenarios happen across the country in other regions. and that's unfortunate, but that's kind of a byproduct of the philosophy, and so you play within those rules and you try to do the best you can to place people in a competitive bracket and make it a great tournament. And we sure had a great tournament last year. And the people at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, I am so looking forward to going back, because if you want to talk about a group of people that care and invest and want student athletes and coaches to have an amazing experience, they do it. And so it's great and motivates you to get it right so that you can get the right people on the train to Holland.
I know this is kind of I got a couple questions that kind of set up here. First and foremost, is there any frustration that, I know the percentage of the budget for Division III is based on an X percentage of the contract with CBS, TNT, Turner, I should say, et cetera, for the committee. That contract keeps getting bigger, and granted, I don't know the numbers. It doesn't seem like the budget gets bigger for Division III, or maybe more flights would be allowed. Is there any frustration on that level?
Oh, I mean, I think that there is, there especially is on Selection Sunday.
Yeah.
All of us, our heart rates go up for sure, because we want to get it right, and we know what kind of matchups we're creating and are needing to create in order to meet those rules. However, everybody knows that in order to win a national championship, you got to play the team that's in front of you.
Sure.
It really is ultimately about beating the team that's on the court that night, at that site, at that time. And true champions are crowned that way. And, I believe that personally, my personal philosophy is you do what you need to do with whoever's in front of you at the time. So
I'm just wondering
I still think we get to the right place. We get a champion crowned.
Sure.
And that's the important part.
Yeah, I was just wondering, considering the George Fox, Lewis, and Clark scenario,
yeah,
the fact that the budget doesn't seem to get bigger, and the fact that they still restrict the flights in such a tight way, keeps you from being able to at least get one of those teams out of the area to allow you not to beat up in the second round.
Yeah, we did 2 years ago, but that was just purely by the numbers.
Yeah,
again.
Sure.
And we had a chance to get Lewis and Clark out of Northwest Conference and to Iowa to try to get them split up. And
Sure.
so, the committees, this one, the ones that come in the future and the ones in the past, are always trying to think outside of the box to create those opportunities for no matter what region it is. And some years it works and some years it doesn't. But again, we're fortunate that the NCAA provides a great service and great work by all of their people there to help us facilitate a great championship.
And of course, this year you might have to move George Fox out, not Lewis and Clark, the way they're playing some basketball right now.
Yeah, we're having some good races out here in the West, and St. Thomas being upset last night by St. Ben's was kind of an interesting one. We had an interesting night last night in
Carnage
basketball.
Carnage. It was an interesting week, period. But yeah.
And obviously the Calvin Hope one will continue to draw our interest with us having a national championship up there again this year, that direction. And then the WashU loss also. So a lot of interesting stuff coming.
Another thing to look ahead at, too, that's interesting is the D1 or the D3 men's basketball, because they're playing at the D1 with a championship, spreads everything out. The first 3 weeks they play one game in the NCAA tournament each weekend before they play the Elite Eight Final Four in Salem, which is the week after Holland, and then 15 days later play the championship. So have you been told you don't have to worry about the men necessarily with the odd, even men get the rights to host whatever, because they only have that one game, and conceivably both games on Saturday could be played at the same site as we have seen in the past?
Yeah, that's a conversation that's come up to us just recently to, our feelings about whether or not those are going to be, it would be okay for them to be shared sites. And yeah, it's this men's championship with the anniversary year, just having a little bit of a change, a bit of an anomaly to how our current operations or our traditional operations, has made us again think outside the box and how can we best support institutions and student athletes and programs and everything else. So, I'm always glad when the guys go out and try these things, that in addition to, having the weighted value to the home and away losses, and then trying this championship will give us some territory and some information and facts to make decisions on our own. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting championship with it spread out, and whether teams are going to be able to host two.
I was going to say, you essentially don't have to worry about the hosting.
Right, because exactly, because there's so few men's games. And
on the kicker of that, how much is this New Jersey thing going to throw a monkey wrench into how you plan?
That's the one that's, obviously I've, as an administrator, been aware of the changes.
Sure.
For instance, the lacrosse championships. We sponsor lacrosse, knowing that that's not going to be there. I think it's obviously going to have to make a big difference on Selection Sunday on where you put things.
Have you ever thought about the idea of going through, and if you find out, you know what, I've got a New Jersey school that could technically, well, I guess on the women's side this isn't going to matter, so never mind, disregard the question, because it's going to be more on the men's side. Could technically have a host, but then move them to a different school. But obviously on the women's side, you got 4 schools. It's a different scenario altogether.
Yeah, this would be different for the guys for sure.
And of course on the men's side, they're trying this out. There's been a lot of coaches who'd like to continue this on. Obviously, this would affect the women. But at the same time, I've heard from officials and administrators that they'd like to give the women this opportunity as well as the men. Have you heard any conversation about it, of having the women's championship at the women's Final Four in D1?
Sure. They have floated the balloon up to us just as a confirmation or as a question in terms of whether or not that's something that we're interested in. And I'm sure it's just the same kind of conversation they had on the men's side about the pluses and the minuses. And, again, the value we have is that we get to see how it plays for the men. Obviously, a great opportunity, and they're going to have a great time with the combined championships and more of the festival-type atmosphere that's worked in a number of other sports. So we'll be paying close attention to how that goes, and obviously we want it to go well for them and learn what we can from their experiences before the women make any decisions about it. We're at Stevens Point for next year. We know that for sure.
Well, that's good. We at least know the plan for 13-14.
For 14, that's right.
Coach, Robin Hamilton, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Hoopsville. We went a little longer than I expected, but I appreciate you answering the questions and giving us a little bit of insight as we head towards regional rankings here in a couple of weeks. And certainly we will have you on again, hopefully right around the time the brackets release, so we can pick your brain then, if you don't mind.
Love it.
But always, I give my guests the final word. Any final thoughts you want to share with those, especially if there's anything we did not cover that you think should be mentioned?
No, I think we're great, Dave. Other than the fact that you're a Baltimore Ravens fan and I'm a Bronco fan, it's been a very pleasant conversation.
Well, good. I'm glad we could get past the first couple of minutes there, to be sure. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Good luck the rest of the way. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional information, like changing of regional rankings on a weekly basis. And furthermore, if you have any information you want to make sure the viewers and listeners do hear. And enjoy your evening. Enjoy the rest of the way, and good luck with the heavy lifting down the road.
I appreciate it, Dave, and I'm very grateful for all the work you do on behalf of our D3 student athletes and our coaches and our programs. It's a great voice for D3 basketball, and Hoopsville is a big part of that, so thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great, Dave. Thanks a lot.
All right. Robin Hamilton joining us on the phone. Pre-taped interview, the National Women's Basketball Committee Chair. When we come back, plenty of Hoopsville. We're a little bit behind time, so we're going to have to catch up. But plenty of Hoopsville still to come. If you have any questions for us, follow us on Twitter at D3Hoopsville, hashtag Hoopsville, Facebook.com/Hoopsville. Email us at Hoopsville@D3Hoops.com. Join us on AOL IM at Hoopsville 2000. We'll be back with plenty more Hoopsville right after this.